Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud While Stoned. Today we're going to do part 7 of Little Blue Book number 18, titled The Idle Thoughts of an Idle Fellow, written by Jerome K. Jerome. And we're off. Let me see. Okay. Just had to make sure we were, okay. The world, the small, round world. What a vast, mysterious place it must seem to baby eyes. What a trackless continent the back gardens appear. What marvelous explorations they make in the cellar under the stairs. With what awe they gaze down the long street, wondering, like us bigger babies, when we gaze up at the stars, where it all ends. And down that longest street of all, that long, dim street of life that stretches out before them, what grave, old-fashioned looks they seem to cast. What pitiful, frightened looks sometimes. I saw a little mite sitting on a doorstep in a Soho slum one night, and I shall never forget the look that the gas lamp showed me on its wizened face. A look of dull despair, as if from the squalid court the vista of its own squalid life had risen, ghost-like, and struck its heart dead with horror. Poor little feet, just commencing this stony journey. We old travelers far down the road can only pause to wave a hand to you. You come out of the dark mist, and we, looking back, see you, so tiny in the distance, standing on the brow of the hill, your arms stretched out towards us. God speed you. We would stay and take your little hands in ours, but the murmur of the great sea is in our ears, and we may not linger. We must hasten down, for the shadowy ships are waiting to spread their sable sails. That's the end of that chapter. Hydrate. Next chapter. Idle Thoughts on Eating and Drinking. I always was fond of eating and drinking, even as a child. Especially eating. In those early days, I had an appetite then, also a digestion. I remember a dull-eyed, livid-complexioned gentleman coming to dine at our house once. He watched me eating for about 5 minutes, quite fascinated seemingly, and then he turned to my father with, "Does your boy ever suffer from dyspepsia?" "I never heard him complain of anything of that kind," replied my father. "Do you ever suffer from dyspepsia, Collywobbles?" They called me Collywobbles, but it was not my real name. "No, Pa," I answered, after which I added, "What is dyspepsia, Pa?" My livid-complexioned friend regarded me with a look of mingled amusement and envy. Then in a tone of infinite pity, he slowly said, "You will know some day." My poor, dear mother used to say she liked to see me eat, and it has always been a pleasant reflection to me since that I must have given her much gratification in that direction. A growing, healthy lad, taking plenty of exercise and careful to restrain himself from indulging in too much study, can generally satisfy the most exacting expectations as regards his feeding powers. It is amusing to see boys eat when they have not got to pay for it. Nose is itchy. Their idea of a square meal is 1.5 pounds of roast beef. Do you ever get a sudden attack of itches? With 5 or 6 good-sized potatoes. Soapy ones preferred, as being more substantial. Plenty of greens, and 4 thick slices of Yorkshire pudding, followed by a couple of currant dumplings, a few green apples, a pen'orth of nuts, half a dozen jumbles, and a bottle of ginger beer. After that, they play at horses. How they must despise us men, who require to sit quiet for a couple of hours after dining off a spoonful of clean soup and the wing of a chicken. But the boys have not all the advantages on their side. A boy never enjoys the luxury of being satisfied. A boy never feels full. He can never stretch out his legs, put his hands behind his head, and closing his eyes, sink into the ethereal blissness that encompasses the well-dined man. A dinner makes no difference whatever to a boy. To a man it is as good as a good fairy's portion, and after it the world appears a brighter and a better place. A man who has dined satisfactorily experiences a yearning love toward all his fellow creatures. He strokes the cat quite gently and calls it poor pussy, in tones full of the tenderest emotion. He sympathizes with the members of the German band outside and wonders if they are cold. And for the moment, he does not even hate his wife's relations. A good dinner brings out all the softer side of a man. Under its genial influence, the gloomy and morose become jovial and chatty. Sour, starchy individuals who all the rest of the day go about looking as if they lived on vinegar and Epsom salts, break out into wretched smiles after dinner. Wreathed smiles after dinner. And exhibit a tendency to pat small children on the head and to talk to them, vaguely, about sixpences. Serious men thaw and become mildly cheerful, and snobbish young men of the heavy mustache type forget to make themselves objectionable. I always feel sentimental myself after dinner. It is the only time when I can properly appreciate love stories. Then, when the hero clasps her to his heart in one last wild embrace and stifles a sob, I feel as sad as though I had dealt at whist and turned up only a deuce. And when the heroine dies in the end, I weep. If I read the same tale early in the morning, I should sneer at it. Digestion, or rather indigestion, has a marvelous effect upon the heart. If I want to write anything very pathetic, if I want to try to write anything very pathetic, I eat a large plateful of hot buttered muffins about an hour beforehand, and then by the time I sit down to my work, a feeling of unutterable melancholy has come over me. I picture heartbroken lovers parting forever at lonely wayside stiles, while the sad twilight deepens around them, and only the tinkling of a distant sheep bell breaks the sorrow-laden silence. Old men sit and gaze at withered flowers till their sight is dimmed by the mist of tears. Little dainty maidens wait and watch at open casements, but he cometh not. And the heavy years roll by, and the sunny gold tresses wear white and thin. The babies that were dandled have become grown men and women with podgy torments of their own, and the playmates that they laughed with are lying very silent under the waving grass. But still they wait and watch, till the dark shadows of the unknown night steal up and gather round them, and the world with its childish troubles fades from their aching eyes. I see pale corpses tossed on white-foamed waves, and deathbeds stained with bitter tears, and graves in trackless deserts. I hear the wild wailing of women, the low moaning of little children, the dry sobbing of strong men. It's all the muffins. I could not conjure up one melancholy fancy upon a mutton chop and a glass of champagne. A full stomach is a great aid to poetry, and indeed no sentiment of any kind can stand upon an empty one. We have not time in our inclination to indulge in fanciful troubles until we have got rid of our real misfortunes. We do not sigh over dead dicky birds with the bailiff in the house, and when we do not know where on earth to get our next shilling from, we do not worry as to whether our mistress' smiles are cold or hot, or lukewarm, or anything else about them. Foolish people, when I say foolish people, in this contemptuous way, I mean people who entertain different opinions to mine. If there is one person I do despise more than another, it is the man who does not think exactly the same on all topics as I do. Foolish people, I say, then, who have never experienced much of either, will tell you that mental distress is far more agonizing than bodily. Romantic and touching theory, so comforting to the lovesick young sprig who looks down patronizingly at some poor devil with a white starred face, and thinks to himself, "Ah, how happy you are compared with me." So soothing to fat old gentlemen who cackle about the superiority of poverty over riches. But it is all nonsense, all cant. An aching head soon makes one forget an aching heart. A broken finger will... Ooh. I lost all pages. Oh, right back to it. A broken finger will... Turn the page. Drive away all recollections of an empty chair, and when a man feels really hungry, he does not feel anything else. We sleek, well-fed folk can hardly realize what feeling hungry is like. We know what it is to have no appetite and not to care for the dainty victuals placed before us, but we do not understand what it means to sicken for food, to die for bread while others waste it, to gaze with famished eyes upon coarse fare steaming behind dingy windows, longing for the penn'orth of a pea pudding and not having the penny to buy it, to feel that a crust would be delicious and that a bone would be a banquet. Hunger is a luxury to us, a pinuit flavor-giving sauce. It is well worth while to get hungry and thirsty merely to discover how much gratification can be obtained from eating and drinking. If you wish to thoroughly enjoy your dinner, take a 30-mile country walk after breakfast and don't touch anything till you get back. How your eyes will glisten at sight of the white tablecloth and steaming dishes then. With what a sigh of content you will put down the empty beer tankard and take up your knife and fork. And how comfortable you feel afterward as you push back your chair, light a cigar, and beam round upon everybody. Make sure, however, when adopting this plan, that the good dinner is really to be had at the end, or the disappointment is trying. I remember once a friend and I, dear old Joe, it was, how we lose one another in life's mist. It must be 8 years since I last saw Joseph Taboys. How pleasant it would be to meet his jovial face again, to clasp his strong hand, and to hear his cheery laugh once more. He owes me 14 shillings, too. Well, we were on a holiday together, and one morning we had breakfast early and started for a tremendous long walk. We had ordered a duck for dinner overnight. We said, "Get a big one, because we shall come home awfully hungry." And as we were going out, our landlady came up in great spirit. She said, "I have got you gentlemen a duck, if you like. If you get through that, you'll do well." And she held up a bird about the size of a doormat. We chuckled at the sight and said we would try. We said it with self-conscious pride, like men who know their own power. Then we started. We lost our way, of course. I always do in the country, and it does make me so wild because it is no use asking directions of any of the people you meet. One might as well inquire of a lodging-house slavey the way One might as well inquire of a lodging-house slavey the way to make beds as expect a country bumpkin to know the road to the next village. You have to shout the question about 3 times before the sound of your voice penetrates his skull. At the 3rd time, he slowly raises his head and stares blankly at you. You yell at him then for a 4th time, and he repeats it after you. He ponders while you count a couple of hundred, after which, speaking at the rate of 3 words a minute, he fancies you couldn't do better than... Here he catches sight of another idiot coming down the road and bawls out to him the particulars. requesting his advice. The two of them argue the case for a quarter of an hour or so, and finally agree that you had better go straight down the lane, round to the right and cross by the third stile, and keep to the left by old Jimmy Mitchell's cowshed, and across the 7-acre field, and through the gate by Squire Grubbin's haystack, keeping the bridle path for a while till you come opposite the hill where the windmill used to be, but it's gone now, and round to the right, leaving Stiggin's plantation behind you, and you say, "Thank you," and go away with a spittling headache, but without the faintest notion of your way, the only clear idea you have on the subject being that somewhere or other there is a stile which has to be got over, and at the next turn you come upon 4 stiles, all leading in different directions. We had undergone this ordeal 2 or 3 times. We had trampled over fields, we had waded through brooks and scrambled over hedges and walls. We had had a row as to whose fault it was that we had first lost our way. We had got thoroughly disagreeable, footsore and weary, but throughout it all the hope of that duck kept us up. A fairy-like vision, it floated before our tired eyes and drew us onward. The thought of it was as a trumpet call to the fainting. We talked of it and cheered each other with our recollection of it. "Come along," we said, "that duck will be spoiled." We felt a strong temptation at one point to turn into a village inn as we passed and have a cheese and a few loaves between us, but we heroically restrained ourselves. We should enjoy the duck all the better for being famished. We fancied we smell it when we got into the town and did the last quarter of a mile in 3 minutes. We rushed upstairs and washed ourselves and changed our clothes and came down and pulled our chairs up to the table and sat and rubbed our hands while the landlady removed the covers, when I seized a knife and fork and started to carve. It seemed to want a lot of carving. I struggled with it for about 5 minutes without making the slightest impression, and then Joe, who had been eating potatoes, wanted to know if it would be better for someone to do the job that understood carving. I took no notice to his foolish remark, but attacked the bird again, and so vigorously this time that the animal left the dish and took refuge in the fender. We soon had it out of that, though, and I was prepared to make another effort, but Joe was getting unpleasant. He said that if he had thought we were to have a game of blind hockey with the dinner, he would have got a bit of bread and cheese outside. I was too exhausted to argue. I laid down the knife and fork with dignity and took a side seat, and Joe went for the wretched creature. He worked away in silence for a while, and then he muttered, "Damn the duck," and took his coat off. He did break the thing up at length, with the aid of a chisel, but it was perfectly impossible to eat it. We had to make a dinner off the vegetables and an apple tart. We tried a mouthful of the duck, but it was like eating India rubber. And we'll pause there for a hydration break. Getting parched. Okay. It was a wicked sin to kill that drake, but there's no respect for an old institution in this country. I started this paper with the idea of writing about eating and drinking, but I seem to have confined my remarks entirely to eating as yet. Well, you see, drinking is one of those subjects with which it is inadvisable to appear too well acquainted. The days are gone by when it was considered manly to go to bed intoxicated every night, and a clear head and a firm hand no longer draw down upon their owner the reproach of effeminacy. On the contrary, in these sadly degenerate days, an evil-smelling breath, a blotchy face, a reeling gait, and a husky voice are regarded as the hallmarks of the cad rather than of the gentleman. Even nowadays, though, the thirstiness of mankind is something supernatural. We are forever drinking on one excuse or another. A man never feels comfortable unless he has a glass before him. We drink before meals and with meals and after meals. We drink when we meet a friend, also when we part from a friend. We drink when we are talking, when we are reading, and when we are thinking. We drink one another's health and spoil our own. We drink the Queen, and the Army, and the ladies, and everybody else that is drinkable. And I believe, if this supply ran short, we should drink our mother-in-laws. By the way, we never eat anybody's health, always drink it. Why should we stand up now and then and eat a tart to somebody's success? To me, I confess the constant necessity of drinking under which the majority of men labor is quite unaccountable. I can understand people drinking to drown care or to drive away maddening thoughts well enough. I can understand the ignorant masses loving to soak themselves in drink. Oh, yes, it's very shocking that they should, of course. Very shocking to us who live in cozy homes with all the graces and pleasures of life around us, that the dwellers in damp cellars and windy attics should creep from their dens of misery into the warmth and glare of the public house bar, and seek to float for a brief space away from their dull world upon a lithe stream of gin. But think, before you hold up your hands in horror at their ill-living, what life for these wretched creatures really means. Picture the squalid misery of their brutish existence, dragged on from year to year in the narrow, noisome room where, huddled like vermin in sewers, they welter and sicken and sleep, where dirt-grim children scream and fight, and sluttish, shrill-voiced women cuff and curse and nag, where the street outside teems with roaring filth, and the house around is a bedlam of riot and stench. Think what a sapless stick this fair flower of life must be to them, devoid of mind and soul. The horse in his stall scents the sweet hay and munches the ripe corn contentedly. The watchdog in his kennel blinks at the grateful sun, dreams of a glorious chase over the dewy fields, and wakes with a yelp of gladness to greet a caressing hand. But the clod-like life of these human logs never knows one ray of light. From the hour when they crawl from their comfortless bed to the hour when they lounge back into it again, they never live one moment of real life. Recreation, amusement, companionship, they know not the meaning of. Joy, sorrow, laughter, tears, love, friendship, longing, despair, are idle words to them. From the day when their baby eyes first look out upon their sordid world to the day when, with an oath, they close them forever, and their bones are shoveled out of sight, they never warm to one touch of human sympathy, never thrill to a single thought, never start to a single hope. In the name of the God of mercy, let them pour the maddening liquor from their throats and feel for one brief moment that they live. We may talk sentiment as much as we like, but the stomach is the real seat of happiness in this world. The kitchen is the chief temple wherein we worship. Its roaring fire is our vestal flame, and the cook is our great high priest. He is a mighty magician, and a kindly one. He soothes away all sorrow and care. He drives forth all enmity, gladdens all love. Our God is great, and the cook is his prophet. Let us eat, drink, and be merry on furnished apartments. Oh, you have some rooms to lent. Mother, well, what is it? Ere a gentleman's about the room. Ask I'm in, I'll be in for a minute. Where are your steps inside, sir? Mother, I'll be in a minute. So you step inside, and after a minute, Mother comes slowly up the kitchen stairs, untying her apron as she comes and calling down instructions to someone below about the potatoes. Good morning, sir, says Mother, with a washed-out smile. Will you step this way, please? Oh, it's hardly worthwhile my coming up, you say. What sort of rooms are they, and how much? Well, says the landlady, if you step upstairs, I'll show them to you. So, with a protesting murmur meant to imply that any waste of time complained of hereafter must not be laid upon your charge, you follow Mother upstairs. At the first landing, you run up against a pail and a broom, whereupon Mother exasperates upon the unreliability of servant girls and bawls over the balusters for Sarah to come and take them away at once. When you get outside the rooms, she pauses, with her hand upon the door, to explain to you that they are rather untidy just at present, as the last lodger left only yesterday. And she also adds that this is their cleaning day. It always is. With this understanding you enter, and both stand solemnly, feasting your eyes upon the scene before you. The room cannot be said to appear inviting. Even Mother's face betrays no affirmation. Untenanted, furnished apartments. Same under pearl embroidered bodices as they do under Mother Hubbard's cloaks. Have steel casks and chimney pot hats made no difference to the brains that work beneath them. O time, great Kronos, and is this your power? Have you dried up seas and leveled mountains and left the tiny human heartstrings to defy you? Ah, yes, they were spun by a mightier than thou, and they stretch beyond your narrow ken, for their ends are made fast in eternity. Ah, you may mow down the leaves and the blossoms, but the roots of life lie too deep for your sickle to sever. You refashion nature's garments, but you cannot vary by a jot the throbbings of her pulse. The world rolls round obedient to your laws, but the heart of man is not of your kingdom, for in its birthplace 1,000 years are but as yesterday. I am getting away, though, I fear, from my furnished apartments, and I hardly know how to get back. But I have some excuse for my meanderings this time. It is a piece of old furniture that has led me astray in fancy's gather, somehow round old furniture like moss round old stones. One's chair and tables get to be almost part of one's life, and to seem like quiet friends. What strange tales the wooden-headed old fellows could tell, did they but choose to speak. At what unsuspected comedies and tragedies have they not assisted? What bitter tears have been sobbed into the old sofa cushion? What passionate whisperings the settee must have overheard. New furniture has no charms for me compared with old. It is the old things that we love, the old faces, the old books, the old jokes. New furniture can make a palace, but it takes old furniture to make a home. Not merely old in itself. Lodging house furniture generally is that. But it must be old to us, old in association and recollections. The furniture of furnished apartments, however ancient it may be in reality, is new to our eyes, and we feel as though we could never get on with it. As to, in the case of all fresh acquaintances, whether wooden or human, and there is very little difference between the two species sometimes, everything impresses you with its worst aspect. The knobby woodwork and shiny horsehair covering of the easy chair suggests anything but ease. The mirror is smoky. The curtains want washing. The carpet is frayed. The table looks as if it would go over the instant anything was rusted on it. The grate is cheerless. The wallpaper hideous. The ceiling appears to have had coffee spilled all over it. And the ornaments, well, they are worse than the wallpaper. There must surely be some special and secret manufactory for the production of lodging house ornaments. Precisely the same articles are to be found at every lodging house all over the kingdom, and they are never seen anywhere else. There are the two, what do you call them? They stand one at each end of a mantelpiece, where they are never safe, and they are hung round with long triangular slips of glass that clank against one another and make you nervous. In a commoner class of rooms, these works of art are supplemented by a couple of pieces of china, which might each be meant to represent a cow sitting upon its hind legs, or a model of the temple of Diana at Isiphus, or a dog, or anything else you like to fancy. Somewhere about the room you come across a bilious-looking object, which at first you take to be a lump of dough left about by one of the children, but which on scrutiny seems to resemble an underdone Cupid. This thing the landlady calls a statue. Then there is a sampler worked on by idiot related to the family, a picture of the Huguenots, 2 of 3 scripture texts, and a highly framed and glazed certificate to the effect that the father has been vaccinated, or is an odd fellow, or something of that sort. You examine these various attractions, and then in dismay ask what the rent is. That's rather a good deal, you say, on hearing the figure. Well, to tell you the truth, answers the landlady with a sudden burst of candor, I've always had, mentioning a sum a good deal in excess of the first named amount, and before that I used to have a still higher figure. What the rent of apartments must have been 20 years ago makes one shudder to think of. Every landlady makes you feel thoroughly ashamed of yourself by informing you, whenever the subject crops up, that she used to get twice as much for her rooms as you are paying. Young men lodgers of the last generation must have been of a wealthier class than they are now, or they must have ruined themselves. I should have had to live in an attic. Hydration. I should have had to live in an attic. Okay. Curious that in lodgings the role of life is reversed. The higher you get up in the world, the lower you come down to your lodgings. On the lodging house ladder, the poor man is at the top, the rich man underneath. You start in the attic and work your way down to the first floor. A good many great men have lived in attics, and some have died there. Attics, says the dictionary, are places where lumber is stored, and the world has used them to store a good deal of its lumber in at one time or another. Its preachers and painters and poets, its deep-browed men who will find out things, its fire-eyed men who will tell truths that no one wants to hear. These are the lumber that the world hides away in its attics. Haydn grew up in an attic, and Chatterton starved in one. Addison and Goldsmith wrote in garrets. Faraday and De Quincey knew them well. Dr. Johnson camped cheerfully in them, sleeping soundly, too soundly sometimes, upon their trundle beds, like the sturdy old soldier of fortune that he was. Inured to hardship and all careless of himself, Dickens spent his youth among them. Morland his old age, alas, a drunken, premature old age. Hans Andersen, the Fairy King, dreamed his sweet fancies beneath their sloping roofs. Poor, wayward-hearted Collins leaned his head upon their crazy tables. Priggish Benjamin Franklin, savage, the wrong-headed, much troubled when he could afford any softer bed than a doorstep. Young Bloomfield, Bobby, Burns, Hogarth Watts, the engineer, the roll is endless. Ever since habitations of men were reared 2 stories high, has the garret been the nursery of genius. No one who honors the aristocracy of mind can feel ashamed of acquaintanceship with them. Their damp-stained walls are sacred to the memory of noble names. In all the wisdom of the world and all its arts, all the spoils that it has won from nature, all the fire that it has snatched from heaven, were gathered together and divided into heaps, and we could point and say, for instance, these mighty truths were flashed forth in a brilliant salon amid the ripples of light laughter and the sparkle of bright eyes. And this deep knowledge was dug up in the quiet study, where the bust of Pallas looks serenely down on the leather-scented shelves. And this heap belongs to the crowded streets, and that to the diest field. The heap that would tower up high above the rest, as a mountain above hills, would be the one at which we should look up and say, this noblest pile of all, these glorious paintings and this wondrous music, these trumpet words, these solemn thoughts, those daring deeds, they were forged and fashioned amid misery and pain and the sordid squalor of the city garret. There, from their eye-rise, while the world heaved and throbbed below, the kings of men set forth their eagle thoughts to wing their flight through the ages. There, where the sunlight, streaming through the broken panes, fell on the rotting boards and crumbling walls. There, from their lofty thrones, those rag-clothed Joves have hurled their thunderbolts and shaken before now the earth to its foundations. Huddle them up in their lumber rooms, O world, shut them fast in and turn the key of poverty upon them. Weld close the bars and let them fret their hero lives away within the narrow cage. Leave them there to starve and rot and die. Laugh at the frenzied beatings of their hands against the door. Roll onward in your dust and noise and pass them by forgotten. But take care lest they turn and sting you. All do not, like the fabled phoenix, warble sweet melodies in their agony. Sometimes they spit venom. Venom you must breathe, whether you will or no, for you cannot seal their mouths, though you may fetter their limbs. You can lock the door upon them, but they burst open their shaky lattices and call out over the housetops, so that men cannot but hear. You hounded wild Rosea into the meanest garret of the Rue Street Jacks, and jeered at his angry shrieks. But the thin piping tones swelled 100 years later into the sullen roar of the French Revolution, and civilization to this day is quivering to the reverberations of his voice. As for myself, however, I like an attic. Not to live in. As residents, they are inconvenient. There is too much getting up and down stairs connected with them to please me. It puts one unpleasantly in mind of the treadmill. The form of the ceiling offers too many facilities for bumping your head, and too many for shaving, and too few for shaving. And the note of the tomcat as he sings to his love in the chilly night outside on the tiles becomes positively distasteful when heard so near. No, for living, it gives me a suite of rooms on the first floor of a Piccadilly mansion. I wish somebody would. But for thinking in, let me have an attic up 10 flights of stairs in the densest quarter of the city. I have all Herr Teufendrock's affection for attics. There is a sublimity about their loftiness. I love to sit at ease and look down upon the wasp's nest beneath, to listen to the dull murmur of the human tide ebbing and flowing ceaselessly through the narrow streets and lanes below. How small men seem, how like a swarm of ants sweltering in endless confusion on their tiny hill. How petty seems the work on which they are hurrying and scurrying. How childlessly they jostle against one another and turn to snarl and scratch. They jabber and screech and curse, but their puny voices do not reach up here. They fret and fume and rage and pant and die. But I, mein Werther, sit above it all. I am alone with the stars. The most extraordinary attic I have ever come across was one a friend and I once shared many years ago. Of all eccentricity, planned things, from Bradshaw to the maze of Hampton Court, that room was the most eccentric. The architect who designed it must have been a genius, though I cannot help thinking that his talents would have been better employed in contriving puzzles than in shaping human habitations. No figure in Euclid could give any idea of that apartment. It contained 7 corners, 2 of the walls sloped to a point, and the window was just over the fireplace. The only possible position for the bedstead was between the door and the cupboard. To get anything out of the cupboard, we have to scramble over the bed, and a large percentage of the various commodities have thus obtained was absorbed by the bedclothes. Indeed, so many things were spilled and dropped upon the bed that toward night time it had become a sort of small cooperative store. Coal was what it always had most in stock. We used to keep our coal in the bottom part of the cupboard, and when any was wanted, we had to climb over the bed, fill a shovelful, and then crawl back. It was an exciting moment when we reached the middle of the bed. We would hold our breath, fix our eyes upon the shovel, and poise ourselves for the last move. The next instant, we and the coals and the shovel and the bed would be all mixed up together. I've heard of the people going into raptures over beds of coal. We slept in we slept in one every night, and were not in the least stuck up about it. But our attic, unique though it was, had by no means exhausted the architect's sense of humor. The arrangement of the whole house was a marvel of originality. All the doors opened outward, so that if anyone wanted to leave a room at the same moment that you were coming downstairs, it was unpleasant for you. There was no ground floor. Its ground floor belonged to a house in the next court, and the front door opened direct upon a flight of stairs leading down to the cellar. Visitors, on entering the house, would suddenly shoot past the person who had answered the door to them and disappeared down these stairs. Those of the nervous temperament used to imagine that it was a trap laid for them, and would shout murder as they lay on their backs at the bottom till somebody came and picked them up. It is a long time ago now that I last saw the inside of an attic. I have tried various floors since, but I have not found that they have made much difference to me. Life tastes much the same, whether we quaff it from a golden goblet or drink it out of a stone mug. The hour comes laden with the same mixture of joy and sorrow, no matter where we wait for them. A waistcoat of broadcloth or a fustian is alike to an aching heart, and we laugh no merrier on velvet cushions than we did on wooden chairs. Often have I sighed in those low-ceilinged rooms, yet disappointments have come neither less nor lighter since I quitted them. Life works upon a compensating balance, and the happiness we gain in one direction we lose in another. As our means increase, so do our desires, and as we ever stand midway between the two. When we reside in an attic, we enjoy a supper of fried fish and stout. When we occupy the first floor, it takes an elaborate dinner at the Continental to give us the same amount of satisfaction. And that is the end of Idle Thoughts by an Idle Fellow, written by Jerome K. Jerome, Little Blue Book number 118. And that last chapter was food and drink, and ended up talking about apartments and attics. Ramble. Okay, that's it for this book. Thanks for listening, and join me in the next book.